When the trees talk. When the trees talk. For as long as humans have walked the earth, the trees have been their quiet protectors. They stood as silent sentinels, offering shade from the sun and shelter from the rain. Their roots held the soil against the storm, and their leaves filtered the air, a constant, selfless gift. Humans in their fleeting lives saw only wood and leaves, but they were unaware of the vast, intricate network that connected every forest, grove, and lone sapling. Trees communicated through the air, their words carried not by sound, but by the subtle, rhythmic vibrations of the wind. A gentle breeze could carry a lullaby from a cherry tree in Japan, while a gusting gale could transport a somber warning from the ancient baobabs of Africa. From the dawn of time, the oldest of them all, the Methuselahs and the great sequoias, had presided over this grand council. They watched human history unfold, their collective wisdom a silent library of ages. But as the centuries turned, a deep sorrow took root within their barks. They had watched humans take their gifts and abuse them, poisoning the very air and water that gave them life. The conversations among the ancients, once filled with stories of quiet joy, now rumbled with the weight of profound disappointment and anger. The whispers in the wind grew sharp, filled with a new, dangerous purpose. The command came from the eldest bristlecone pine, its gnarled trunk a testament to thousands of years of witness. It was a message of ultimate despair, rippling through the Earth's network like a shockwave.
They have refused to listen,
The wind hissed, carrying the ancient's voice to the farthest corners of the globe.
Our life-giving breath is their destruction. Our oxygen fuels their machines of ruin. We will not be their silent victims any longer.
The command was simple and devastating. Cease the release of oxygen. Let the world's breath hold still. The edict tore through the global forest network, igniting a fierce debate among the trees. In the Amazon, a towering Brazil nut tree argued for the humans she had watched play under her canopy.
We gave them life. We loved them.
Her leaves trembled.
Are we to condemn them to a slow suffocation, to become no better than they have been to us?
But across the ocean, a young redwood, scarred by recent fire, shot back its argument through a fierce, roaring gust.
Their love is poison. We must save ourselves, for who else will protect the earth? Their survival is our death.
The wind carried these arguments back and forth, weaving a complex narrative of grief, rage, and a lingering, powerful love that refused to be extinguished. The question of life and death for all species hung in the balance, a decision that would be whispered on the next passing breeze. The arguments raged on, but the voices of despair were amplified by the countless collective memories of pain. The wind carried a new kind of story now, not of wisdom and care, but of violence and neglect. From the heart of the Amazon, a great cry rippled outward, a memory shared by thousands of felled brethren. The wind carried the sound of tearing saws and the rumble of heavy machinery.
They cut us down for their animals,
The voice of a fallen mahogany tree lamented.
and then the stench of their breath, of their methane, choked our brothers who were left behind. Our gift of life was used to create a slow death for us all.
In the cities where trees were planted in sterile rows, a different sorrow was shared. The wind sighed with a feeling of deep loneliness.
They call us ornamental.
A street-side maple whispered.
They prefer our kind, without fruit, without seeds, without the promise of new life. They planted us for their aesthetics, removing our true purpose because our fruit was a nuisance. They want a tame, barren beauty, not the wild, messy cycle of life we offer.
The others felt the sting of this rejection, the humiliation of being seen as less than their whole, natural selves. High in the mountains, a chorus of anguish shivered down the slopes. 1,000-year-old spruce, its roots anchored to a sheer cliffside, screamed its memory into the wind.
We held the mountains together for them.
It cried.
We kept the soil from the valleys and the rocks from their roads. But they tore us out, our roots pulled free with a careless snap to carve their paths. Now the rain comes, and without us the soil cannot hold. The water runs free, and their roads, their homes are buried in the very earth we once protected.
These were the stories that carried the weight of the new world. The grief was tangible, the betrayal palpable. Every gust of wind, every rustle of leaves was no longer just a communication. It was an accusation, a collective memory of pain, strengthening the resolve of those who believed the time for selfless giving was over. The question of life and death was no longer a philosophical debate. It was a reckoning. But from the ancient mangroves, their roots tangled in the salty earth, came a voice of caution carried by the humid air. It was a plea, not of love for humans, but of love for all life.
What of the otters who play in our shade?
The mangrove's voice rustled.
What of the fish who lay their eggs between our roots? Their lives are intertwined with our own. Are we to condemn them for the mistakes of another species?
The concern rippled through the global network, a chilling question that stalled the momentum of anger. A chorus of worried whispers rose from the forests. A beech tree in an ancient European wood shuddered its leaves.
The squirrels, the deer, the birds who nest in our branches, they have done us no harm. They depend on our fruits, our shelter, our breath. Is it not a cruelty we decry in others to visit it upon the innocent?
The argument spread like a gentle, persistent rain. The trees who had felt the weight of the mountains being torn down now felt the weight of a new moral dilemma. Was their righteous anger justification for a mass extinction of their own making? The debate was no longer a simple matter of self-survival versus sacrifice for humanity. It had become a question of collateral damage, of ethics, and of the fundamental responsibility of their kind to the entire delicate web of life. The whispers now carried the heavy burden of a moral choice. As the debate raged, the very same winds that had once carried stolen people across the sea now spoke for a group of ancient African trees. The wind, which had once filled the sails of ships, now carried a new, powerful message across the Atlantic.
We have seen their suffering.
The ancient baobab's voice boomed, a voice filled with thousands of years of sorrow and witness.
We gave our branches as shade to those who were marched across our lands. We held the earth for those who were starved, and we have heard their silent cries on our very bark. And we tell you this: the cruelty you speak of is not in all of them.
The wind, now a transatlantic messenger, swirled around the forests of the American South and the dense canopies of Brazil, sharing a nuanced truth.
Not all have the same resources to cause this calamity. Not all have the same contempt. Many are simply struggling to survive under the same system that is killing you. To condemn them all is to make the same mistake of generalization you accuse them of. We have protected them when they were in their greatest need, and we know that not all of humanity is rotten. Some are victims, just as we are.
The winds of Africa had introduced a new moral dimension to the debate. The decision was no longer between punishing a single species or sacrificing themselves, but between a righteous rage that blinded them to nuance and the complex truth that their enemy was not a monolithic group, but a fragmented species, some of whom were as helpless as they were. The whispers carried this new weight, a burden of compassion that complicated the simple fury of revenge. Suddenly, a new sound entered the conversation, not the creak of bark or the rustle of leaves, but a soft, collective chorus from below. It was the unified voice of the flowers and the grasses. They were not part of the grand council of trees, but their message, carried by the rising humidity of the plains and the gentle breeze of the meadows, was unwavering.
We will not engage in this activity.
Their voices chimed together, 1,000 tiny petals and blades of grass affirming their stance.
We exist to feed and shelter. We exist to hold the creeping things, the ants, the beetles, the worms, and to feed the small animals that depend on us for sustenance. This is our purpose, and we will not abandon it.
Their refusal was not an act of defiance against the trees, but an unyielding commitment to their own kind. They wondered if their small, humble contribution would be enough. The question, carried on the breeze, was more a plea than a defiance. Would their continuous giving, their steadfast creation of oxygen, be enough to sustain some humans and all the other living beings who had not yet been heard from in the absence of the tree's breath? The weight of the world had not just landed on the trees, but on every living thing that produced oxygen, each one grappling with its own role in the coming calamity. The debate had gone from a grand, global conversation to a poignant, desperate plea for a new kind of compromise. Just as the last whisper of the grasses died down, a cold, dry wind rose from the mountains, a sound that carried the unyielding voice of the bristlecone pine. It was a voice that held the weight of millennia, a sound that had been listening to the foolish arguments of life and death for as long as any of them could remember. The ancient pine's reply was not an argument, it was a prophecy.
You ask if this is a calamity?
The bristlecone pine hissed, its voice as brittle as its bark.
The calamity is already here. You speak of what might happen to the innocent, but I tell you what is already happening to us. I see the blight on our brethren, a sickness that comes from their poisoned air, a slow rot from within until they fall. Not with a crash, but a sigh of surrender. I feel the creeping things, the insects, no longer kept in balance, but now a plague that feasts on our weakness and their disrespect.
The wind grew colder, carrying a vision of suffering to every corner of the planet.
I watch the fires, the flames they call natural, yet I see them fueled by the very wood we provided for their warmth. The flames do not distinguish between friend and foe. And I see the floods, the waters that no longer feed the land, but drown us in the place of those we once held back. We who held the mountains have our roots torn from the earth, and we are left to choke on their mistakes.
The bristlecone pine's voice resonated with finality.
Your fear of a future calamity is a whisper against the roar of the present one. The question is not whether to hurt the innocent, but whether we will allow their innocence to be a weapon against us. The other living things will suffer, but we will all be gone if we continue to give our life-giving breath to a species that uses it for our destruction. This is not a choice of vengeance, but a final, desperate act of survival.
The debate was over. The wind, now a messenger of resolve, began to carry the command once more. The world was about to hold its breath.